The stars trembled as 300 massive warships tore through the fabric of space. Each vessel stretched kilometers long, their dark hulls covered in weapons that had burned entire civilizations to ash. The Draconian fleet had arrived at the edge of human territory, and their commander expected this conquest to be like all the others. Fleet Commander Hen stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Fang. His scaled hands gripped the command rail as he gazed at the small human mining colonies scattered across this outer region. Behind him, his officers worked at their stations with practiced efficiency. They had done this 47 times before. 47 species had fallen before the might of the Draconian Empire. Humanity would be number 48. War Master Al approached the commander with a data tablet. The younger officer's eyes gleamed with anticipation. He had studied the humans for months, watching their communications, analyzing their ship movements, counting their defensive stations. By all calculations, this would be an easy victory. The humans had only a few hundred military vessels spread across dozens of star systems. The Draconian fleet could crush them in a matter of days. Hen activated the communication system. His voice, translated by machines into hundreds of languages, boomed across every frequency that humans used. The message was simple and had never failed before. Surrender within 72 hours or face complete extinction. Submit to the Draconian Empire and become servants. Refuse and watch your worlds burn. There was no third option. There never had been. Thousands of light years away on the frontier station called Sentinel-9, Captain Minu received the transmission. He sat in his command chair, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hand. Around him, his bridge crew turned to look at him with worried faces. They expected panic, emergency protocols, perhaps even immediate evacuation orders. Instead, their captain smiled. Minu pressed a button on his console and forwarded the Draconian message to Earth Central Command. In the attachment field, he typed a single word before sending it off. Finally, his second-in-command, Lieutenant Park, moved closer to his chair. She kept her voice low so the rest of the crew would not hear. Did he understand what was happening? An alien armada had just threatened to destroy humanity. Should they not be doing something? The captain turned to face her and his smile grew wider. They were doing something. They had been doing something for 15 years. Every drill, every supply shortage that forced rationing, every new mining operation in strange locations, every delay in civilian construction projects. It had all been preparation for this exact moment. The trap had been set long ago. They just needed someone arrogant enough to walk into it. On Earth, in the massive underground facility that housed Central Command, Admiral gathered his senior officers. The War Council met in a room carved from solid rock, deep beneath the surface where no weapon could reach them. Defense Minister Lee stood before a massive holographic display that showed the entire Sol system and the surrounding sectors. Red markers indicated the positions of Draconian ships. Blue markers showed human assets. There were far more blue markers than anyone outside this room knew existed. Minister began her presentation. For 3 decades, since humanity had first detected the Draconian Empire's expansion pattern, they had been preparing. Every government on Earth had contributed. Every colony had participated. Trillions of dollars had been spent in secret, hidden within civilian budgets and military exercises that seemed routine. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter was not just a source of minerals. It was the largest weapons platform ever constructed. Thousands of rocks had been hollowed out, fitted with engines and positioned along carefully calculated orbits. To any observer, they looked like normal asteroids. Some even had legitimate mining operations on their surfaces. But inside each one was a weapons system that could destroy a Draconian warship with a single shot. The civilian transport ships that goods between colonies were not all civilian. 1/3 of humanity's merchant fleet consisted of warships disguised as cargo haulers. Their hulls were reinforced with military-grade armor hidden beneath civilian plating. Their cargo holds contained missile batteries instead of supplies. They looked slow and harmless, but they could match any Draconian cruiser in combat. Even the tourist stations orbiting Earth and Mars were not what they seemed. Families visited them every year, children pressed their faces against windows to look at the stars, and restaurants served meals with beautiful views. But hidden beneath the observation decks were point defense systems, torpedo launchers, and enough firepower to protect entire planets. The tourists never knew they were vacationing inside military fortresses. Admiral explained the strategy to his officers. The Draconians would expect humanity to panic. They would expect desperate evacuation attempts, confused military responses, and politicians begging for mercy. They would see exactly what they wanted to see because humanity would show them exactly that. Some ships would flee. Some would hold position as if paralyzed by fear. Communications would seem chaotic and uncoordinated. It would look like every other species the Draconians had conquered. But it would all be theater. Every fleeing ship was moving to a pre-assigned position. Every vessel that seemed frozen in space was actually waiting at a carefully chosen ambush point. The chaotic communications were coded messages hidden within apparent panic. The Draconians had never faced an enemy that could deceive them, because they had never faced an enemy that had time to prepare. Back on the Eternal Fang, Hen watched his tactical displays as the 72 hours counted down. His sensors showed exactly what he expected to see. Human ships scattered in all directions, some headed for deep space. Others clustered around their colonies as if hopping to mount a defense. A few brave or foolish vessels actually moved toward his fleet before apparently thinking better of it and retreating. It was the behavior of prey animals caught between fight and flight. War Master Al reported that human communication channels were flooding with panic. Civilian leaders demanded military protection. Military officers shouted contradictory orders. Some colonies declared they would surrender independently. Others vowed to fight to the last. It was beautiful chaos, exactly what the War Master had seen in 47 previous conquests. These humans were no different from any other species. They would break easily. The deadline passed with no formal surrender. Hen was not surprised. Pride made species refuse the inevitable, at least at first. After the first few colonies burned, after the first few million died, the survivors always reconsidered. He gave the order to advance. The Draconian fleet split into 3 battle groups. The first would strike the colony at Nu. The second would attack the industrial centers near Jupiter. The third would move directly toward Earth itself. Standard doctrine called for breaking the enemy's will by destroying everything they held dear. As the massive warships began their attack runs, moving deeper into human space with their weapons charging, none of them noticed the subtle changes happening around them. The fleeing human ships had stopped running. The confused communications had suddenly become very organized, and those harmless-looking asteroids were beginning to adjust their orbits in ways that asteroids should not move. On Sentinel-9, Captain Minu watched his tactical display with satisfaction. Every piece was in position. Every commander knew their role. 3 decades of planning was about to be tested against an enemy that had never known defeat. He opened a channel to every human military vessel in the system and spoke the words that would begin the war. All units, Protocol Reaper is active. Show them why we built in the dark. War Master Al commanded 87 warships as they approached the human colony of Nu. The planet hung in space before him, blue and green and completely defenseless. His sensors detected only minimal orbital installations, and perhaps 20 human frigates arranged in what appeared to be a protective formation. It was almost sad how unprepared these humans were. His crew worked efficiently, moving the massive ships into bombardment positions that would allow them to rain fire on the planet below. The War Master had personally overseen the destruction of 6 worlds during his career. Each time followed the same pattern. The defending ships would make a brave but futile charge. They would fire their primitive weapons until they were destroyed. Then the bombardment would begin, and within hours, a living world would become a burning rock. He expected nothing different from these humans. His gunnery officer reported that the planet-killer weapons were charged and ready. These massive cannons could crack a planet's crust, triggering earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that would make the entire surface uninhabitable. It was the Empire's favorite weapon for dealing with stubborn prey species. One demonstration was usually enough to make all the others surrender. The War Master gave the order to target the largest city and prepared to fire. Then everything changed. Captain Minu had been watching the Draconian battle group from his position on Sentinel-9, waiting for the exact moment when they would commit to their attack. When he saw their weapons begin to glow with charging energy, he knew the time had come. He activated his communication system and spoke clearly. "All units, Protocol Reaper is active. Show them why we built in the dark." Across the entire star system, seemingly empty space came alive. Asteroids that had been drifting in predictable orbits for years suddenly split open like flowers blooming. Inside each one was a weapons platform that had been waiting in silence. Missile batteries and laser arrays emerged from cunningly hidden bays. Within seconds, thousands of guns were aimed at the Draconian fleet. The civilian transport ships that had been fleeing in apparent panic suddenly shed their disguises. False hull plating fell away to reveal military armor. Fake cargo containers opened to expose missile tubes. What the Draconians had thought were unarmed merchants transformed into warships bristling with weapons. The entire human merchant fleet, or at least the military portion of it, turned as one and began burning back toward the enemy at maximum acceleration. War Master Al stared at his tactical display in disbelief. Where moments ago he had seen scattered and frightened prey, he now saw a coordinated military force emerging from every direction. His sensor officer shouted warnings as contact after contact appeared on the screens. They were surrounded. Somehow, impossibly, the humans had hidden thousands of weapons platforms throughout the system, and they had done it so well that Draconian sensors had detected nothing until it was too late. The first kinetic impactors struck his fleet while he was still trying to understand what was happening. These were not sophisticated weapons. They were simply chunks of metal, accelerated to tremendous speeds and aimed with perfect precision. But at relativistic velocities, even a small piece of tungsten became a devastating weapon. The impactors had been launched weeks ago, following ballistic trajectories that looked like natural debris. Now they converged on the Draconian positions, like a swarm of invisible bullets. 3 of his cruisers died in the first volley. Their shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, did nothing against solid projectiles traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. The tungsten rounds punched through shields, through armor, through the ships themselves, and out the other side. The massive warships simply came apart, torn into pieces by impacts that released more energy than nuclear weapons. Then the human warships closed to combat range, and Al realized with growing horror that they were not following any reasonable military doctrine. Normal space combat happened at ranges of thousands of kilometers, where ships could use their superior shielding and firepower to wear down enemies from safety. But the humans were closing to point-blank range, sometimes less than a kilometer away. At these distances, shields were almost useless, and every shot was guaranteed to hit. Engineer Specialist Lee worked at her station aboard the destroyer Soul's Hammer as it dove toward a Draconian battleship 10 times its size. Around her, the crew worked with practiced precision, loading tungsten shells into the batteries as fast as the weapons could fire. She had helped design these guns, had spent 5 years testing them in secret facilities hidden in the asteroid belt. Now she watched with satisfaction as her creations tore through enemy armor like paper. The human strategy was brutal and simple: close fast, hit hard, and give the enemy no time to react. Every human ship had been built for close-range combat, with heavy frontal armor and powerful engines that could push them into knife-fighting distance before the enemy could respond. The Draconians had never faced anything like it because no species had ever been crazy enough or desperate enough to fight this way. War Master Al tried to organize a retreat, but the humans had prepared for that too. His faster-than-light drives would not activate. His sensor officer reported spatial anomalies throughout the combat zone. The humans had deployed mines that disrupted the very fabric of space, making it impossible to escape into FTL. His fleet was trapped in normal space with an enemy that wanted to fight at ranges where draconian technological superiority meant nothing. The battle became a savage melee. Draconian ships tried to create distance, but human vessels pursued them relentlessly. When energy shields stopped working at close range, it came down to armor thickness and weapon power. The Draconians had more of both, but the humans had something else. They had been training for this specific type of combat for decades. Every captain knew how to maneuver in close quarters. Every gunnery officer could hit a target at point-blank range while under fire. Every crew had practiced emergency repairs, while their ship was being torn apart around them. Captain Minu watched the battle from Sentinel-9 and felt both pride and sorrow. His plan was working perfectly. The Draconians were dying in droves, caught completely by surprise, but humans were dying too. Each blue marker that disappeared from his tactical display represented hundreds of his people who would never go home. The destroyer Freedom's light rammed a Draconian cruiser and both ships vanished in a ball of nuclear fire. The frigate's Pride lost power and drifted helplessly until enemy fire tore it apart. Victory was coming, but the price was high. War Master Al realized he was going to die. His flagship was crippled, his fleet was scattered, and the humans showed no mercy. He managed to send one final message toward the main Draconian fleet before his communication systems failed. The message was simple. Humanity is not prey. Request immediate reinforcement. They are not what we thought. We need help. We need. The message cut off as Soul's hammer, engine screaming at beyond maximum burn, slammed into the Eternal Fang's secondary command section at 17% of light speed. Engineer Specialist Lee had calculated the exact impact point that would cause catastrophic damage while ensuring total destruction of both vessels. Her calculations were perfect. The collision released enough energy to create a miniature sun that burned for 3 full seconds. When the light faded, both ships were gone, reduced to expanding clouds of superheated plasma. Of the 87 Draconian ships that had attacked Nu, only 12 survived to limp away into deep space. All of them were heavily damaged. Most would not make it back to the main fleet. The human defenders had lost 38 ships, and Nu's orbital stations were damaged but intact. The colonists on the planet's surface had watched the battle from their homes, safe behind shields that the Draconians never got a chance to test. Captain Park assumed command of the surviving human forces in the sector. She had served as Minu's second officer for 3 years and knew his tactical preferences by heart. As she organized recovery operations and prepared for the next Draconian assault, she thought about her captain's last words to her before Soul's hammer made its final run. He had told her to remember what they were fighting for. Not glory, not victory, but survival. The Draconians had to learn that humanity was not easy prey. Whatever the cost, that lesson had to be taught. In the debris field that had once been 2 fleets, human recovery teams moved carefully through the wreckage. They collected bodies for burial and salvaged technology for study. They also searched for Draconian survivors but found none. At close range, with ships moving at combat speeds and weapons firing at point blank, there were rarely survivors. Both sides had learned that lesson in blood and fire. Fleet Commander Hen received War Master Al's final message aboard the Eternal Fang, far from the battle. He watched the combat data with growing disbelief. This was impossible. No prey species had ever fought back like this. No defeated enemy had ever prepared so well or struck so hard. For the first time in his long military career, he felt something unfamiliar. It might have been respect, or perhaps it was fear. Fleet Commander Hen stood before the holographic display in his war room and tried to understand what had gone wrong. The data from the first battle played over and over, but it made no sense. 87 warships reduced to 12 survivors in less than an hour. The humans should have been crushed. Every tactical analysis said they were inferior in every way that mattered. Yet his fleet had been ambushed, surrounded, and destroyed by an enemy that was supposed to be primitive and unprepared. His remaining officers gathered around him, their expressions uncertain. For the first time in Draconian military history, a war council was debating whether to withdraw from a conquest. Some argued that humanity had simply gotten lucky with a clever trap. Others pointed out that luck alone could not explain the level of preparation and coordination they had witnessed. The humans had been ready for this war long before the Draconian fleet arrived. That suggested something far more dangerous than luck. Sub-Commander, the most cautious of his officers, suggested they fall back and report to the Empire. Let the High Council decide whether to commit more forces, send for reinforcements from other sectors, take time to study this enemy and develop new tactics. It was the sensible thing to do, the smart thing to do. Hen listened to these arguments and then ordered executed for cowardice. The body was dragged from the war room while the other officers stood in shocked silence. The fleet commander would not retreat, could not retreat. The Draconian Empire had never withdrawn from a conquest, and he would not be the first commander to show such weakness. Pride demanded human blood. Honor demanded revenge. He ordered his remaining 2 battle groups to converge on Earth itself. If the humans wanted war, he would bring it to their home world. He would burn their capital planet and scatter their ashes across space. On Earth, Admiral received intelligence reports about the Draconian fleet's new course and smiled. They were coming straight for humanity's heart, just as he had hoped. Lieutenant Commander, his senior tactical officer, expressed concern. The outer defenses had worked perfectly, but now the enemy knew what to expect. They would not fall for the same tricks twice. Should they not try to stop them before they reached Earth? The Admiral shook his head. Earth was not humanity's capital because it was safe. It was the capital because it was the most heavily defended location in known space. Every resource, every weapon, every tactical advantage humanity possessed was concentrated in the Sol system. The Draconians wanted to cut off the head of human civilization. Let them come. Let them see what happened when you attacked humanity's home. The trap at Nu had been just the opening move. Earth was where the real battle would be fought. The Draconian 2nd Battle Group, commanded by War Master Al, led the advance toward Earth. His sensors showed the inner system ahead, with Mars glowing red in the distance. The planet appeared to have minimal defenses, just some orbital stations that looked like scientific facilities and what seemed to be terraforming installations on the surface. Intelligence reports suggested Mars was primarily a civilian colony focused on research and agriculture. It would make an excellent target for a demonstration. Al decided to bombard Mars as they passed. It would serve as a warning to Earth of what was coming. His gunnery crews prepared to fire on the agricultural domes and research stations. Let the humans on Earth watch their neighbor planet burn. Let them know the futility of resistance. He gave the order to open fire, and his fleet committed to their attack run. It was a decision he would regret for the last 3 seconds of his life. Captain commanded the Mars defense grid from his position deep beneath Olympus Mons, the largest volcano in the solar system. For 20 years, he had overseen Project Olympus Mons, a weapon system so massive and so secret that only a handful of people knew it existed. The extinct volcano was not extinct at all. It had been hollowed out, reinforced, and converted into a planetary-scale mass driver. Now, as Draconian ships entered his firing range, he activated the weapon that would change the course of the war. Olympus Mons erupted, not with lava or gas, but with tungsten. Thousands of projectiles, each weighing several tons, were accelerated through magnetic rails built into the mountain itself. They emerged from vents disguised as volcanic craters, traveling at velocities that made them essentially unstoppable. The projectiles had been pre-calculated for every possible approach vector. As the Draconian fleet committed to their attack, they flew directly into a wall of metal traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. War Master Al's flagship was the first to die. A tungsten rod punched through the bow, through the command deck, through the engine room, and out the stern in less than a heartbeat. The ship came apart like a toy torn by an angry child. Around him, his entire fleet suffered the same fate. Ships that had survived 100 battles, that had conquered dozens of worlds, were reduced to debris in seconds. The attack was so sudden and so overwhelming that most crews died without ever knowing what hit them. Captain watched his tactical display as 38 red markers blinked out of existence. His crews were already working to cool down the mass driver coils and prepare for a second shot if needed. But it was not needed. The Draconian advance force was gone, completely annihilated by a single volley from a weapon they never saw coming. The engineers cheered but kept his expression neutral. This was just one battle. The war was far from over. Fleet Commander Hen received news of the Mars massacre and finally understood the truth. These humans were not like other prey species. They did not fight with honor or follow predictable patterns. They built weapons into their planets, disguised warships as civilian vessels, and prepared ambushes that could destroy entire fleets in seconds. Every assumption he had made about humanity was wrong. Every tactical doctrine that had worked for 47 conquests was useless here. His tactical officer, one of the few senior commanders still alive, approached carefully. The officer suggested that perhaps withdrawal might be reconsidered. Not cowardice, but tactical flexibility. They could report back to the Empire, request massive reinforcements, and return with a force large enough to overwhelm even human defenses. It was the logical thing to do. Hen listened and understood the wisdom of the words. Then he activated his sidearm and shot the officer through the head. There would be no retreat. The Draconian fleet would push forward to Earth. They would fight and they would win, or they would die trying. Hen could not return to the Empire and admit that humanity had defeated him. Better to die in battle than live with such shame. He ordered all remaining ships to converge on his position. They would advance as one fleet, with every weapon ready and every sensor active. No more ambushes, no more surprises. They would see the humans coming and crush them with overwhelming force. Admiral reviewed the battle reports from Mars with satisfaction. Project Olympus Mons had exceeded all expectations, but he knew the Draconians would not make the same mistake again. They would be cautious now, alert for hidden weapons and prepared for unconventional tactics. The element of surprise was gone. The next battle would be fought on more even terms, and humanity would have to rely on skill and determination rather than clever tricks. Lieutenant Commander approached with updated intelligence. The Draconian fleet was gathering for a final push toward Earth. All remaining ships were being concentrated into a single massive formation. They were coming with everything they had left, and they were coming angry. She asked if the Admiral was certain that Earth's defenses could hold against such a force. Even with all their preparations, the Draconians still had nearly 200 warships. The odds were not good. The Admiral considered her question carefully before answering. The odds had never been good. Humanity was fighting an enemy that had conquered 47 other species, that had technology far beyond anything humans could produce, that had resources and experience that made Earth look primitive by comparison. But humanity had something those other 47 species lacked. They had known the Draconians were coming. They had prepared for this war with patience and planning that spanned decades. And most importantly, they were fighting for their survival on their home ground. That made all the difference. Across the Sol system, human forces prepared for the final confrontation. Ships that had survived the earlier battles underwent rapid repairs. Ammunition was distributed from hidden stockpiles. Crews caught what sleep they could and said quiet goodbyes to loved ones back home. Everyone knew what was coming. The Draconians would throw everything they had left at Earth in one desperate attempt to win. It would be the largest space battle in human history, and its outcome would determine whether humanity survived as a free species or died like all the others. Captain Park commanded a squadron of 12 destroyers that had survived the battle at Nu. Her ships were battered, her crews were exhausted, but they were ready to fight again. She thought about Captain Minu and the sacrifice he had made ramming his ship into the enemy flagship. She wondered if she would be called upon to make a similar sacrifice. She hoped not, but if the choice came, she knew what she would do. Humanity had to survive. Whatever the cost, whatever the sacrifice, their species had to endure. That was all that mattered. The Draconian fleet began its final advance toward Earth. Hen stood on the bridge of his new flagship and prepared for battle. He knew he was probably going to die. His fleet was too small and the humans were too well prepared. But he would fight anyway because he was Draconian and Draconians did not surrender. If this was to be his last battle, he would make it worthy of songs. The humans would remember this day. They would remember the price of defying the Draconian Empire. And perhaps, just perhaps, they would learn to fear. Earth hung in space like a blue jewel, beautiful and seemingly fragile. The Draconian fleet approached from multiple vectors, their sensors sweeping for threats, their weapons charged and ready. Fleet Commander Hen expected a desperate last stand. He expected human ships throwing themselves uselessly against superior firepower. He expected orbital stations firing until they were destroyed. What he did not expect was the message that came from Luna, broadcast on all frequencies in perfect Draconian language. Defense Coordinator Park sat in his command center, buried deep beneath the lunar surface. Around him, dozens of officers monitored tactical displays showing every ship, every weapon platform, every defense system in the Sol system. He had spent 10 years preparing for this moment, overseeing the construction of Earth's defenses while maintaining the illusion of civilian normality. Now, as the enemy fleet closed in, he activated his communication system and spoke directly to the Draconian commander. You were expected. You were prepared for. You were already dead the moment you entered our space. Kept his voice calm and professional as he delivered the message. Around Earth, dozens of what appeared to be civilian satellites suddenly activated. Tourist hotels transformed into weapons platforms. Research stations revealed hidden missile batteries. Debris fields that had floated in orbit for decades split open to show torpedo launchers. Every piece of infrastructure surrounding humanity's home world was, in fact, a carefully disguised fortress. The Draconians found themselves flying into a network of overlapping defensive zones that had been 30 years in the making. Research Director watched from her station as systems she had personally designed came online. She had spent her entire career developing weapons that looked like civilian technology, solar panels that were actually armor plating, communication arrays that were really targeting systems, waste processing stations that contained enough explosives to destroy battleships. Her whole life's work was about to be tested in combat. Fleet Commander Hen realized immediately that he had made a terrible mistake. Earth was not protected by a few defensive platforms and some brave ships. It was surrounded by what was essentially a solid shell of weapons, layer upon layer of guns and missiles and energy barriers. Every approach was covered. Every angle was defended. The humans had not just fortified their home world. They had turned it into the most heavily defended location in the galaxy. Breaking through would cost him everything he had left, and possibly more. But retreat was no longer an option. His fleet was already committed, already in range of human weapons. If he tried to withdraw now, they would be torn apart by long-range fire. The only way out was through. He ordered all ships to concentrate their fire on a single sector, hopping to punch a hole through the defenses large enough for his fleet to exploit. It was a desperate tactic, but desperation was all he had left. The Draconian ships formed up and began their attack run. Captain Park commanded a task force of 30 destroyers positioned to intercept exactly this type of massed assault. Her tactical computer had predicted 17 possible attack vectors the Draconians might use, and this was the third most likely. She had ships pre-positioned along all 17 routes. As the enemy fleet concentrated their formation, she moved her task force into position and prepared to meet them head-on. This would not be a clever ambush or a hidden weapon. This would be a straight fight, ship against ship, and she intended to win. The two fleets collided in the space between Earth and Luna. Draconian heavy cruisers traded fire with human destroyers at ranges measured in kilometers rather than light seconds. Energy shields flared and failed under sustained bombardment. Armor plating melted and evaporated. Ships on both sides died as nuclear fires bloomed in the darkness. This was the kind of savage close-quarters combat that humanity had prepared for. But it was also the kind of desperate battle where courage mattered as much as technology. Aboard the destroyer Soul's Hammer, engineer specialist Lee monitored her systems with growing concern. The ship had taken damage in the battle at Nu, and the repairs had been rushed. Now, as they engaged a Draconian dreadnought 3 times their size, stress fractures were appearing in the hull. The engines were running hot. The weapons systems were pushing beyond their designed limits. The ship was slowly tearing itself apart, but they kept firing because stopping meant dying, and dying meant the Draconians might break through to Earth. Her sensor display showed something that made her blood run cold. The dreadnought they were fighting was charging a massive weapon in its forward section. Had seen intelligence reports about this weapon. It was called the World Breaker, and it could crack a planet's crust from orbit. If the Draconians got into firing position, they could turn Earth into a dead world. She ran calculations and realized with sick certainty that none of the human ships could destroy the dreadnought before it fired. There was only one way to stop it. Activated the ship-wide communication system and explained the situation to the crew. The World Breaker would fire in approximately 4 minutes. The only way to prevent it was a direct ramming attack at maximum speed. The collision would certainly destroy Soul's Hammer and everyone aboard. There was no time to evacuate, no time for rescue. She was not asking permission to sacrifice the ship. She was simply informing them of what needed to be done and giving them time to make peace with it. Captain receives transmission and felt her heart break. Soul's Hammer was the finest ship in her task force, and its crew were among the best she had ever served with. But was right. There was no other way. She gave permission for the ramming attack, her voice steady despite the tears running down her face. Around the bridge, her officers stood at attention in silent respect for the crew that was about to die. Across the human fleet, ships paused in their battles just long enough to acknowledge the sacrifice that Soul's Hammer was making. The crew of Soul's Hammer worked quickly. There were no dramatic speeches or emotional farewells. They were professionals doing a job that needed to be done. Some wrote final messages to loved ones. Others simply sat at their stations and focused on their tasks. Engineer specialists pushed the engines to absolute maximum, far beyond any safety limits. The ship began to shake violently as systems failed one by one. The temperature inside climbed rapidly. But the ship kept accelerating, faster and faster, aimed directly at the enemy dreadnought. The Draconian crew of the World Breaker's Fist detected the approaching destroyer too late. They tried to maneuver, tried to shoot it down, but Soul's Hammer was moving at 17% of light speed and nothing could stop it. Engineer had time for one final thought before impact. She hoped her calculations were correct. She hoped the collision would be devastating enough to destroy the dreadnought completely. She hoped her sacrifice mattered. Then the two ships met, and everything became light and heat and energy. The explosion was visible from Earth's surface, a second sun that burned for 3 full seconds. Both ships were annihilated instantly, vaporized by the tremendous energy of the collision. The shockwave damaged ships on both sides and momentarily paused the battle as everyone stared at the expanding fireball. Then slowly, the fighting resumed. But something had changed. The Draconian fleet had lost its most powerful ship and its most devastating weapon. More importantly, they had lost their will to continue. Fleet Commander Hen watched his tactical display as his fleet began to disintegrate. Ships were breaking formation and attempting to flee. Captains were ignoring his orders. The humans had not just defeated him militarily. They had broken his fleet's spirit by demonstrating a level of courage and self-sacrifice that Draconians could not match. His species conquered through superior technology and overwhelming force. They did not understand an enemy that would deliberately destroy themselves to protect their home. It was insanity. It was illogical, and it was devastatingly effective. The World Breaker's fist was gone. His flagship was crippled. His fleet was scattered and dying. Hen finally accepted what he had known deep down since the battle at Nu. He had lost. Humanity had defeated the Draconian Empire. For the first time in their history, the Draconians were not the apex predators. They were just another species that had underestimated their prey. He activated his personal escape pod and abandoned his flagship as it came apart around him. Perhaps he could make it back to Draconian space and warn them that humanity was not prey. They were death itself. Admiral watched the battle from Central Command and knew that victory was close. The Draconian fleet was broken and running. Earth was safe. Humanity had survived. But the cost had been terrible. Tens of thousands dead. Dozens of ships destroyed. Sol's hammer and its entire crew lost in a single selfless act. He thought about all the people who had died protecting Earth and made a decision that would define humanity's future relationship with the galaxy. He opened a command channel to all human forces and spoke words that many would later question, but none would dare to disobey. No survivors, no witnesses, no one can know what happened here. The order spread through the human fleet like wildfire. No survivors, no witnesses, no one can know what happened here. Lieutenant Commander stood on the bridge of her cruiser and stared at the communication display, unable to believe what she was reading. They had won. The Draconians were fleeing. Surely now was the time for mercy, for taking prisoners, for learning about their enemy. She opened a direct channel to Admiral and questioned the order. The Admiral's face appeared on her screen, and his expression was harder than she had ever seen it. He explained his reasoning in simple terms. If word got out that humanity had defeated a Draconian fleet, the entire Draconian Empire would descend on human space with everything they had. Right now, somewhere in the galaxy, the Draconian High Council believed their fleet had been lost to some unknown disaster. Let them keep believing that. Let humanity remain beneath their notice. Better to be underestimated than to be targeted for total annihilation. Wanted to argue, but she understood the logic. The Draconians had conquered 47 species. Their empire spanned thousands of star systems. If they decided to focus all their resources on destroying humanity, no amount of preparation or clever tactics would save Earth. The only way humanity survived was if the Draconians never learned what happened here. She closed the channel and gave orders to her crew. They would hunt down every fleeing Draconian ship and ensure none of them made it home. Over the following weeks, human hunter-killer teams tracked the scattered remnants of the Draconian fleet. It was ugly work. Many of the enemy ships were crippled and helpless. Their crews broadcast surrender offers on all frequencies. Some even sent messages in broken English, begging for mercy and offering to share technology or intelligence. Captain Park led a squadron that cornered a damaged cruiser at the edge of the Sol system. The Draconian captain sent a personal plea directly to her ship. The enemy captain explained that he had a family back home. He had children who would never know what happened to him. He was willing to surrender completely, to disable his weapons, to provide any information the humans wanted. He just wanted to live. Listened to the entire message and then closed the channel without responding. She gave the order to fire. The missiles flew true and the Draconian cruiser died in nuclear fire, sat in her command chair and felt nothing. Not guilt, not satisfaction, just a cold emptiness. This was necessary. This was survival. The human fleet worked systematically through every sector where Draconian ships might have fled. They checked every asteroid field, every gas giant's orbit, every possible hiding place. When they found enemy vessels, they destroyed them without warning or communication. Some Draconian ships tried to fight back, but they were damaged and outnumbered. Others tried to run, but human ships were faster and more maneuverable. A few attempted to send faster-than-light messages back to the Empire, but human jamming systems blocked every transmission. Within 3 weeks, the last Draconian vessel was destroyed. Defense Minister Lee oversaw the most elaborate cover-up in human history. The debris field from the battles was methodically swept clean. Every piece of Draconian technology was collected and transported to secret research facilities. The wreckage of human ships was salvaged for parts, and the remains of the dead were returned to their families, with carefully crafted stories about training accidents or civilian disasters. Nothing that could reveal the truth was left floating in space. The civilian population of Earth and the colonies knew that something had happened. They had seen the flashes of battle in space. They had heard rumors about an alien fleet, but the government released a carefully prepared explanation. There had been a military exercise that went wrong. Some experimental weapons had malfunctioned. A few ships were lost, but everything was under control. Most people believed the official story because the alternative was too frightening to consider. Alien empires that could destroy entire civilizations were the stuff of fiction, not reality. In the Draconian home system, thousands of light years away, the High Council met to discuss the missing fleet. Fleet Commander Hen had departed 3 months ago with 300 warships to conquer a primitive species called humans. Since then, there had been complete silence. No communications, no status reports, no victory announcements. The Council sent scout ships to investigate. The scouts found nothing but empty space and faint radiation signatures consistent with normal stellar phenomena. The High Council debated what could have caused such a complete disaster. Some suggested a navigational error that sent the fleet into a star or black hole. Others proposed a previously unknown spatial anomaly that could swallow entire fleets. A few whispered about a new threat in that region of space, something powerful enough to destroy 300 warships without leaving any survivors to tell the tale. The debates went on for weeks, but no consensus was reached. Finally, the High Council made a decision. The region of space where the fleet had vanished would be marked as unexplored and dangerous. Future expansion would focus on other directions where the risks were better understood. Humanity's corner of the galaxy was simply not worth the potential losses. The Draconian Empire had thousands of worlds to choose from. Why waste resources on one mysterious sector when there were easier conquests available? The decision was unanimous and recorded in official records. Human space was to be avoided until further notice. Captain Park stood in the memorial hall on Luna, 1 year after the battle that history would never record. The walls were covered with names, thousands of them. Each one represented someone who had died protecting humanity from an enemy the public would never know about. She found Captain Minus's name among the lists and placed her hand against the cold metal. He had sacrificed everything, and the galaxy would never know. None of them would be remembered as heroes, because the battle itself could not be remembered. Admiral delivered a speech to the assembled fleet commanders. He spoke about sacrifice and duty. He reminded them that their victory was only possible because humanity had prepared in silence and fought in secret. That same secrecy must continue. The Draconians might return someday, and when they did, humanity needed to maintain the advantage of being underestimated. Let the galaxy think humans were primitive and weak. Let enemies approach with arrogance. That arrogance was a weapon as powerful as any. Research Director, now promoted to Director of Advanced Weapons Development, worked in her laboratory deep beneath the surface of Mars. Around her, teams of scientists studied Draconian technology salvaged from the battles. They were learning how to build better shields, more powerful engines, and weapons that made the previous generation look like toys. Every piece of enemy equipment was being reverse-engineered and improved. When the Draconians eventually returned, they would find humanity had evolved far beyond what they remembered. Lieutenant Commander brought a cup of coffee and asked a question that had been bothering her for months. What if the Draconians discovered the truth someday? What if they learned that humanity had destroyed their fleet? Would all this secrecy have been for nothing? Consider the question carefully before answering. If the Draconians discovered the truth now, humanity would be crushed. But with every year that passed, humans grew stronger. In 10 years, in 20 years, in a century, humanity might be powerful enough that the truth no longer mattered. The secret would be kept, Generation after generation would guard it. Children would grow up never knowing that their world had once been hours away from destruction. Historians would puzzle over gaps in military records and unexplained increases in defense spending. But the truth would remain locked away in classified archives, known only to a select few who understood what was at stake. Humanity's survival depended on the galaxy, never learning what had happened in Sol's system during those terrible weeks. In a small apartment on Earth, the daughter of engineer specialist Lee celebrated her 10th birthday. Her mother had died in a training accident, or so she had been told. The government had paid for her education and provided a generous pension. She knew her mother had been important, had done something significant, but the details were classified. She would grow up never knowing that her mother had saved the entire human race by sacrificing herself to destroy an alien weapon. The secret would die with the generation that fought the war. 10 years after the battle, a new generation of human warships patrolled the borders of human space. They were faster, stronger, and more heavily armed than anything that had existed before the Draconian invasion. The crews were trained in tactics developed from studying the battles that officially never happened. They watched the stars and waited for threats that might never come. And if enemies did appear, they would find humanity ready. Always ready, always watching, always prepared to fight in silence and win in secret. In the Draconian Empire, Fleet Commander Hen's name was recorded as lost in a tragic accident. His family received honors for his service and his sacrifice. The 300 ships that vanished with him were listed as casualties of deep space exploration. No one suspected the truth. No one questioned the official records. The Draconian Empire continued its expansion in other directions, conquering species that fought conventionally and surrendered predictably. They never returned to human space. They never learned what had happened to their fleet. Admiral sat in his office late at night, reviewing reports and making plans for a future that might never come. On his desk was a single photograph showing the bridge crew of Sol's Hammer, taken days before their final mission. He looked at their smiling faces and made them a silent promise. Humanity would survive. Whatever it took, whatever sacrifices were needed, their species would endure. The galaxy was full of predators, but humanity had proven they could be predators too. They had fought in the darkness and won in silence, and they would do it again if necessary, as many times as it took, until humanity was strong enough that the truth no longer mattered. The stars shone cold and distant over Earth, indifferent to the struggles of the creatures crawling across its surface. Somewhere in the galaxy, the Draconian Empire continued its expansion, unaware that they had already met their match and lost. Somewhere in that same galaxy, humanity prepared for the next threat, learning and growing stronger with each passing year. The battle was over, but the war for survival would never end. And humanity would fight it the way they fought everything, with determination, sacrifice, and absolute secrecy. Because in the darkness between stars, only those who fight in silence survive to tell no tales.